His own creation ultimately become twisted into something
I
monstrous
might
that
play a
turned
game,
ends
see
in
what's
killing both
popping.
him and his son. Now, flip over to what the original games told us about
I'm
William
definitely not
Afton, a
buying this shit.
creative
I'm
robotics
not buying
genius whose
this.
entire
I'm
family
not
story
buying it.
is defined by loss
I
and
got all
tragedy.
the
Now,
extra
Anne,
shit.
killer robot, creates a baby, kills Elizabeth.
No
Fredbear
more Mr.
kills
Ice
David,
Guy.
and Michael is then killed
Oh
by
my
the
god.
Hunt. She also has a mysterious
Hey,
and
they're bringing back
absolute voices
Rivals? The
who we
shits.
theorized about in the past being represented by the Lord, the musical ballerina
Mm-mm.
from Sicily, mostly because of the song she sings. Again, doesn't that sound familiar?
Let's go
Almost
with
like
that.
it's exactly how M1 Fiona feels. Her husband locked away inside his walls, trying to work on
Yeah.
projects, not spending any time with her, all with the room of their dead child laying empty, waiting to be filled again. Oh wait, there's more. There's the house on the hill with a secret
I
underground
got
workshop,
A-Rock
the Murray house above MCM, and the Afton house above sister location. There's a robot designed to be a babysitter that essentially fails their duty. Security maintenance.
Are
Five
they
things as
really
mysterious
keeping
monster
doing
mental
this
that
shit
works to
too?
have a power supply for the
She
machines
cool.
created, giving them life, as it were.
I want that
Primary
dragon.
villains of the franchise, Afton and M1 Fiona, wanting to put their children back together, and there's then the wonderful and ever underutilized baby. Gain sentient after the accidental death of William Afton's daughter, Elizabeth. William then rejects her, punishing her to a
I'm
secret
not interested
underground
in doing
lane
this shit.
built beneath the house. And near beat for beat, parallel
Probably not, but we'll
M2's
see.
story of rejection from men. I could go on, but I
I
think
want
you get
bugs.
the point.
I'm
The
not gonna
number
lie.
of times the
I want
stories from
Bugs Bunny.
older games parallel the stories of
If I play
Murray and
enough, I'll get
cannot
it.
be
If not,
purely
I don't know. Oh,
coincidence.
we got a pet
It's
again this one?
matter. They say history is due to repeat itself, but when it's this much and when it involves a shady company as Fazbear, you know there's something more going on. That something is bigger than I could ever imagine. Ladies and
What's the
gentlemen,
shit for
the reason
bugs?
these things
No,
will
actually
align
not have
so
one.
perfectly is for one simple reason. The stories from the
Jim.
first 7 games are ones that
No.
told us everything we knew about Henry, Charlie, William, Elizabeth, Michael, and David are entirely made up. Now, to some degree, we knew this already. In my theory crafting live stream, I kept bringing up the idea that if I wanted, we had told point blank that the games were just that, games. Fabrications from the mind of a complete. The books corroborate this with stories like The Monty Within, where kids refer to Pizzeria Simulator as an in-universe game where the mediocre abilities come from. But we also learned from Tank Girl that the whole indie dev story wasn't entirely truthful. And so we basically used that line as a way to explain away some of the inconsistencies that really the stories were just as we originally thought. However, since then, we have had a few more pieces of evidence that would seem to suggest they're not fictionalized versions of real events, they're just fiction. One of the earliest stories from Tales from the Petaplex was Help Wanted, and in it we learn about Steel a developer that was hired by Fazbear to make the first 3 to 4 games made light of the rumors of murder and death surrounding the business. But as he works on it, his mind begins to fall apart thanks to some reasons. Not only did Fazbear never tell him what the story really was, he was working purely on rumors, he was also being driven insane. So how trustworthy is that? In the Walmart exclusive Tales story Monster, we learn that here. We learn about a kid who wrote stories about a pizzeria owner in the local paper, claiming that he is a serial killer and abuser, turning the whole town against him. In fact, the stories he whips up sound an awful lot like the FNAF 1 newspapers we see in the game. But throughout the story, we're told explicitly that these stories are completely fictional, fabrication made up by a kid with a grudge. And if that's the case, it even showed that these FNAF 1 newspapers also can't be trusted. And with that in mind, it makes you question what else can be trusted. Of course, I'm not saying that absolutely everything is fake. If we have corroborating evidence, especially from the still old era of games, the ones that took that meta approach and revealed to us the real world that these games existed in, then we should be good to go. Like, we do know that we exists and this insignificant audio examples. Likewise, a FNAF 6 location definitely existed because it was the pizza place, and clearly there was an incident or incidents that Fazbear wanted to cover up with a single video game. The first place, as we're talking about it, wanted. However, what I'm saying is that of course those events can never be significant because outside of those in-universe games don't really have any
Yes, no.
reason for them, and so you can't rely on them to be
Mm,
or even rely on them happening as we saw them at all. But when you open up that can of worms, suddenly everything you thought you knew is was we have them actually a murderer or just an awful business owner who might die and come back to life as a public past? Was anything ever really possessed by spirits to begin with? Maybe instead of a murdering business owner with a bunch of ghost children possessing animatronics, it was always just a rogue AI that Fazbear got their hands on, they couldn't control, and had a habit of stuffing into suits that also mimic the behavior and voices of children. GameStop did say that was the kind of story that was more interesting.
Me and the fan base and tendency fully in sci-fi, even though I didn't come back into the roots of the supernatural. So anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry,
That would be an absolutely odd nightmare. In fact, it would have been more than a nightmare. It would have been the VR apocalypse, admitting to the world, oh yeah, our proprietary self-learning AI has absorbed the trauma of its creator, developed the violence, and has now started stuffing customers into animatronic suits. We don't know how to stop it, and we are liable for all of it. So, would be the end of the company. But if you had scapegoats, like a jerk boss who happened to die on the premises in one of their multi-spring-look suits, so yeah, it's totally him. Our founder was secretly a monster. We all knew he was a jerk, but we didn't think he'd go this far. He did everything, but it's over now. The monster's gone. Case closed. And things like F6. Was it a gathering of ghosts, or was it a corporate clean? A recall where Fazbear
yes,
did
no.
what it could to
I like
contain
this.
their rogue
It's
AI,
working.
sending something like a recall signal or some frequency data
I guess
that would cause
so.
any
Yes,
machine
sir.
running the MIG program to warm to one location. And that famous speech, it isn't a heartfelt eulogy, it's Fazbear cementing Afton's role as the mentioning villain, doing a final blow on their skin. The real fire probably just being a calculated attempt to destroy all the evidence of their rogue AI. And for a while, they probably thought they'd succeeded. And so they built the pizza place on top of the old establishment, only to reintroduce the mimic via some old circuit boards. Cillian Afton, his family, their story was created to turn Fazbear's failure in stopping the mechanical mess they adopted into a spooky ghost story. And not only did they rewrite Afton's history, but to be sure that people wouldn't trace it back to their acquisition of Murray's Costume Manor and Edwin's mimic, they took part in Edwin's story and used it into their families. Fiona was a puppeteer, and so M1 was translated into a puppet created by Henry to protect his child. One of the most traumatic events of Edwin's life, the death of his son, became the death of Afton's son. The fight of 83 echoes of M1's Fiona's grief over her lack of connection with Edwin after the death of their son, turning into reverse in the video game Ghosts Laments. One of M1's final messages to Edwin became the words screamed by another overarching vengeful spirit. Even the words that Edwin actually spoke to M1 Fiona about M2 that he could never replace his real son, now just infamously refusing line with him. Fazbear may not have stolen Edwin's vengeance, but they did steal his soul, twisting it and removing all memory of Edwin and his contributions from the equation. His merits and faults split apart, grafted onto a scapegoat.
Password. Sanctuary. Access granted. Welcome to the 7 secure audio server. Now
Evidence to
decrypting.
support this whole
Status
idea.
reports of all 7
Parallels in
members.
the games, lines in the books, even Scott himself is just one issue that I cannot shake. It kind of sucks. It's basically turning around and telling us, yeah, the 10 years of theorizing, it doesn't matter, so. And that is just disheartening for us fans who have spent all those years trying desperately to take small pieces of the puzzle and put them together in such a way that we create a cohesive story. We spent 10 years picking up our ideas of the crying
back
child,
over
only
here.
for this idea essentially washed
I
them down.
should
In
go.
fact, it's one of the reasons why some of the bird reactions to Signal Ability's law so heavily frustrated, because Signal Ability's whole thing was revealing to all of us even though he thought he did, it was revealing information he basically had no way of knowing until very recently, which is tough compared to the quote good old days, where even though solving FNAF was hard, it felt like the pieces were all there for us to use, rather than key information being withheld for the sake of the quiz. And this theory kind of just perpetuate that idea. It would also make theorizing incredibly challenging going forward, at least more than it already is. We can speculate about how some elements might fit together, as I've done a little bit today, but it's just that, speculation, because we don't have any sense of how much those old games can even use as evidence. I'm sure a bunch of you out there hate this idea. Heck, I don't really like it either. We here at Theorist have been big proponents of Scott rebooting the franchise and its story for quite some time. This, however, wasn't what we meant to start with this. Because this, I get the video, is a huge, and a secret of the Mimic taught us anything is that we don't have the pieces of the puzzle at this point. So all we can do is interpret what we have as best we can. And that can be done in a couple of different ways. Like we've done with today's theory. If this ending isn't your body bowling alley, you can always go and check out the other ending for today's theory. There's a little more on the keep everything canon side. At the end of the day, the important thing is that we are open and we're willing to explore all the avenues and work together, because that's how we solve this weird and wonderful thing. Since then, I've actually received a lot of comments asking me one very specific thing. Why wasn't I mentioning other theories, especially when two of them were trying to answer the same question? Fate's Fiona by Gibby's Horror Host said, God David by T-Drex. The honest answer is, unfortunately, I know that
Hello.
hard to believe us FNAF theorists usually want to take in as much FNAF content as possible, but as the amount of theorists has grown over the years, so has the rise in comments accusing theorists of stealing ideas from other people. So to make sure I wasn't in any way influenced by their theories, subconsciously, I purposely avoided watching any other FNAF theories while I was working on my own. It's a shame, really, because at the end of the day, solving FNAF has always been about cooperation. It's why Matt did his live talk back after FNAF 4, and it's why we seem to do today. We need to work together if we have any hope of getting through it. So now that I've been out of my secret big holes for a few months, I figured it was my time I check them both out to see whether they were able to fill in any of the gaps that I couldn't, or whether there's some combination of our ideas that could maybe make this story finally make sense. I hope you're ready, theorists, because it's time for another round of my trash takes. See your theories in the comments or subreddit. I'll pick my favorite in the next episode of Trash. Let's start with Gibby. As the name implies, Fate Fiona focuses on the character of Fiona Murray, David's mother. He posits that Fiona, after becoming the M1 mimic and put into the Nexus machine, becomes this overpowering force that manipulates the world around her into repeating history. Not just her history, but Fazbear's history as a whole, like the fires, the bad fathers, and how's it on top of the secret facility, and focus. All this immediately caught my attention as it explores a similar line of thinking to what I was exploring in my games of fiction approach. It manages to keep it all within the universe rather than being a fictional story borrowing ideas from reality. Gibby suggests that Fiona is able to achieve this world manipulation through main factors. Firstly, the idea that Fazbear keeps building on top of these establishments, meaning all the remnant and agony of these creatures are still present in the area. In a sense, the builder. This explains why in games like FNAF 1, we see the posters of the world change, or why in Security Breach there are random plushies moving around the place. It's the classic burial ground trope. The buildings are haunted because they are built upon the dead. But when you think about it, like the secret of the Mimic and Ruin, who specifically is dead and underneath these buildings, right in the basement of the NCF, waiting to put her son back together. Fiona. Secondly, he looks at the story of Bench from Fazbear Frights.
I think it's just sitting here, bro.
Thoughts get strong enough to actually affect subatomic particles in order to manipulate the world around them and other people's thoughts. This is a real-world concept of zero. Gibby explains that down there in the basement, Fiona's thoughts are so strong, her desire to rebuild her family so powerful that she's able to utilize the zero-point field and affect the thoughts of those in the area, namely Liam and Phyllis, consciously planting the name David in his head so that he meets his own child David, as well as subconsciously giving him the idea to start kids into suits like the Mimic used to do back in the 1970s. And finally, there's the physical wires. Fiona is plugged into everything Fazbear touches, much like the storyteller was in the Tales from the Pizza Plex books, an AI designed to connect to everything. but ends up infecting it with bad ideas and colleagues. Similarly, Fiona gets plugged into Fazbear and so witnesses everything that happens throughout Fazbear's history due to the remnantly behind, forcing the technology to also review parts of history, like Fredbear killing David when the opportunity presents itself because her son David also died on the premises, or Colonel Bonnie being locked away in a back room, destroyed, being watched by possessed wet robots, such like Springtrap was locked away in a back room after dying, being watched by five spirits. Fiona is central.
Why were you still back there?
With her memories and will being so strong, she's forcing history to repeat itself over and over again. Now, when I first watched this video, I thought it was out there, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it tied into a number of theories we already had on this channel. Even a theory ages ago about why we thought there was so much puppet imagery across the Pizzaplex, specifically in the wires connecting everything. At the time, we felt there's obvious character we knew that had an association with the puppet Charlie. We even equated it to the idea that she was haunting the building like an old school ancient burial ground, rather than being tied to a specific animatronic like we used to see. We had the same idea, it's just we didn't know Fiona was a character in order to tie her to all the puppet imagery instead of Charlie. Admittedly, it may still seem a little strange. Why would Fiona be associated with the puppets? Well, I think we can come up with a good explanation for it. Another one of our mimic theories, I suggested that M1 Fiona's memories are becoming muddy thanks to the amount of data she's received from the original games while being used to make her wanted. But while I focus solely on what she learned from Afton in order to make her glitch trap, there are other characters in those games she'd have learned about and possibly even adopted as part of this new messy persona. Characters like Charlie. I specifically called out that she seems to be adopting traits from characters that she identifies with. Afton is a man that wants to put his family back together no matter the cost. For example, Fiona and Puppet share a couple of close connections too. They're both protecting children. They both say that their children have died from their watch. Fiona has also been puppeteer, so again, she has an association with puppets. These similarities all add to the M1 Fiona being a confused mess. She can't tell what is her and what is else. Is it glitch trap? Is it Charlie? Is it David? And that all these things connected feels like giving off puppet vibes, even though it's supposed to be Fiona and not Charlie. On the flip side, if you subscribe to Gibby's theory wholesale, it wouldn't just be data, but it would be agony and remnant and memories of all the victims who died on this one piece of Fazbear land entering Fiona's system, meaning Charlie's memories are now part of Fiona's. But that also brings up a part of the theory that is possibly one of the biggest debates coming out of Secret of the Mimic. Is there a session, or is it just AI? For this theory to work, it requires you to be of the belief that the M1 Mimic program didn't just become Fiona through being an AI, but through possession, using the classic old school FNAF tools of things like Revenant and Agate. Two of the reasons I've seen for M1 being possessed are that she learned to be Fiona after Fiona died, and that Edwin uses the frequency 4625 on one audio logs and hears the voice of Fiona after her death. This frequency is actually associated with a ghost radio frequency in the real world, known as the buzzer. As the name implies, it simply broadcasts a static buzz across the world, but occasionally sometimes even voices. The key thing is, leading some to believe it's ghosts speaking from beyond the grave. However, upon looking into it more, it seems that this radio frequency is something more to do with Russian intelligence, with two other radio stations, the Pip and the Squeak Wheel, also transmitting a similar signal sound, occasionally interrupted by coded Russian voice messages. It's real messages being sent by real people, not ghosts. It means that if Steel Wool is invoking the iconography of frequency 4625, they're telling us while it may appear to be something it's actually a real person, or at least a thing that's sending the message. She also has a great theory about how actually Mycelium men were all Fiona trying to help Edward, because the AI Edward made in the dimensions was designed to also select how M1 wants to be Fiona. It's not from Fiona herself, but from the recordings of her, the Mycelium, which is why she acts like her, but she feels more sporty and robotic. And no, it's not just because she's a robot, but because she never wants to think. Plus, as I mentioned before, Swan does seem to be away from the old paranormal stories of Susan
And it's equally sci-fi, so anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry.
Since how long we've been getting stories about AI taking over the world, in the Tales from Pittsburgh series, while we still get ghost stories, we get by people where you live specifically there's frailty where a girl has a precious necklace similar to the one from the that's what drives it. Instead, emphasizing the root of those old backstory beats and brought into AI and machine sentience. Without the real spirit of Fiona, it means there's no remnant or agony, and it becomes harder to explain things like the 0 point field. That's not to say it's impossible by any stretch. There are signs of some paranormal things going
Some
on at
boss,
MCM.
yeah.
I mean, the White Tiger costume feels very much like old school Golden Thread. That, or it's just hallucinating.
Let's not even-
It's what needs to be. The 0 point field idea comes from the story Fetch, and it's
Uh.
a Fetch sequel. So maybe they
uh,
are
uh, 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 uh.
if it turns out to be true, maybe Fiona would help to justify my theory that old man consequences will actually walk. I suggest that because it the close to help the story many years later, that even though it's when he died at the end of season
Oh, that was it? Type shit. I felt like bots.
I suggest that
Either that or just new season jitters. We'll see.
files also like Gateway's digital signature, a safety protocol inside the Linux programming designed as a fail